Aita for not taking back my wife after she abandoned our family for her career dream. About 9 months ago my life took an unexpected turn. It wasn't something I planned or wished for. Rather, it was as if someone had decided to pull the rug out from under me without warning. My ex-wife, 42 Fahrenheit on 43 minutes, had been married for years, sharing a life that, although not perfect, was ours. Together we had 2 children, ages 6 and 8, and lived in a quiet Midwestern town, close to our families. I ran a small local business that gave us stability, while she had a decent job at a marketing company. It seemed we had found a balance until she decided to break it all. Began with a confession that at first didn't seem so serious. I applied for a senior management position at a startup. She told me one night with a sparkle of excitement in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. I remember thinking good for her until she added, "It's in another city, actually in another state." That's when the knot in my stomach appeared. I tried to process what I had just heard, but I didn't have much time because she continued. "And I got it. I start in 2 weeks." It wasn't a conversation. It was an announcement. Something already decided that moment, my mind flooded with questions. When did she plan this? Why didn't she tell me sooner? How did she think this would affect our family? But instead of expressing those concerns, the only thing that came out of my mouth was, "What about us?" That's where an argument began that lasted for days. She argued that this was the opportunity of a lifetime, that she was tired of the monotony, and that she couldn't pass something like this up. I tried to make her understand that it wasn't just her life that would change, that we had 2 children who needed stability and a home that we couldn't just leave. There was also my personal situation. My parents, both elderly and with health problems, depended on me. Moving was not a viable option. Despite everything, she had already made her decision. She didn't say it with those words, but it was clear. "I'm leaving with or without you," was her final statement one night. I was stunned. I never thought she would reach the point of choosing a job over her family. I believed not easily that I could change her mind, but I was wrong. Finally, we reached an agreement that, in retrospect, was a mistake. She would move first, set up her life, and start her new job, while I stayed with the children in our house. According to her, it was a temporary solution. She would come on weekends and I could decide later if I wanted to move with her. She promised she would do everything possible to maintain the connection with us and prove that the distance wouldn't be a problem. The day she left was strange. There were no tears or long hugs, just a hurried, "See you soon," and a kiss on the forehead for the children. When I closed the door, I stood there, staring into the emptiness, wondering if that was the last time our family would be whole. The first few weeks weren't so bad. Or so. I kept telling myself. We talked on the phone every night, and the children were excited to tell her what they had done during the day. She promised she would return soon to visit us, but she always seemed to have some excuse to postpone her return. The first time she canceled her weekend trip, I understood. "Work is demanding, honey. I'm trying to adapt," she said. But the second time, something inside me began to doubt. Folks, before continuing, if you're enjoying the stories, please subscribe to the channel. We're almost reaching a very important goal of 1,000 subscribers. While she was moving away, I was trying to keep everything running. I took the children to school, prepared their meals, managed my business, and attended to my parents. Everything fell on me, and although it was exhausting, clung to the hope that she would return. But little by little, calls began to space out. Instead of every day, they became every 3 days, then once a week. When I tried to call her, she rarely answered. The children began to notice her absence more than I did. "Why is it Mom coming?" my 6-year-old daughter would ask while playing with a drawing she had made for her. "She said she was coming this time, right?" my son would add. I tried to give them reassuring answers, something like, "She's busy with work, but she'll be here soon." But even those words felt empty. One day, while checking my email, I saw an email from her. It was brief and direct. She wanted a divorce. There weren't many explanations, just calculated and cold words about how she thought this was best for everyone. I felt my world crumble, not just for me, but for the children. How could she be so indifferent to what was happening to us? When I opened that email, I went blank for a moment. I thought it was some kind of bad joke, but reading it again, I realized it was real. She had written the message with the coldness. I didn't expect what hurt me. Most wasn't the fact of the divorce itself, but the way she communicated it, without a call, without a conversation in person, just an email. It was like she was closing a business deal, not a relationship of more than a decade. I responded as calmly as I could, asking for explanations. I didn't want to seem desperate, but I needed to understand how we had gotten to this. The next day, she called. Her voice sounded mechanical, as if she were reading a script. "This isn't working as well as I do. I'm too busy with my new life here, and you don't want to move. There's no point in continuing to pretend that this is going to get better." Every word was like a dagger. I tried to talk about the children, about how they were suffering because of her absence. But she simply dismissed it. "They can come visit me when they're older for now. Best for them to stay with you. I don't want to interfere with their routines anymore." Those words made it clear that she wasn't just abandoning the marriage, but also our children. After that call, something inside me changed. Sadness was replaced by anger. How could someone be so selfish? For years, I had sacrificed my own desires for our family, supporting her in everything. And now she was simply walking away, letting me pick up the pieces. I knew I couldn't afford to break down. I had to be strong for my children. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and legal procedures. She wanted a quick and clean divorce, and I honestly had no reason to fight. Kept the house in custody of the children while she freed herself from any direct obligation. Best for everyone. She told me in our last conversation before signing the papers. I just nodded, tired of arguing. During that time, I began to notice strange patterns in her behavior. Although she had said she was very busy with work, her social media told a different story. Photos in expensive restaurants, exclusive events, and meetings with people who looked like they were from a television series. There was a group of friends who constantly appeared, glamorous women, all single or divorced, with a lifestyle that didn't resemble anything like the life we had built together. It didn't take me long to discover who was behind her transformation. Old friend of hers, whom I always considered a bad influence. This woman was everything I couldn't stand: manipulative, superficial, and unscrupulous. She was an expert at getting involved with wealthy people, taking advantage of it. When I learned that my ex-wife was relying on this person to navigate her new life, everything began to make sense. As the months went by, she practically disappeared from our lives. No more calls, no more promises of visits. The children stopped asking about her. Something that broke my heart also made me feel a certain relief. It was easier to live without the constant disappointment. Little by little, I began to rebuild our routine. I found a rhythm with the children, and I focused on my work. It was hard, but at least I had peace. However, the calm didn't last long. Approximately 4 months after the divorce, I received an unexpected call. It was her. At first, I thought about ignoring her. Something prompted me to answer. Her voice, once firm and confident, was now shaky and full of emotion. "I need to talk to you," she said between sobs. "I've made a mistake." What followed was a monologue of regret and despair. She told me how her new life wasn't what she expected. The company that had hired her was in crisis, and the promises of large salaries and growth turned out to be smoke. Her salary had been cut twice, and now she could barely cover her expenses. Top it off, the friend she had so admired had cast her aside as soon as her financial situation ceased to be convenient. I tried to maintain my composure as she continued. "I miss the children. I miss you. This was all a mistake. Please, I want to come back." There were tears in her voice, but I didn't feel the compassion I expected. Instead, I felt a cold rage. She had made selfish decisions without considering the consequences. Now that things hadn't turned out as she hoped, she wanted me to fix her mess. I told her I needed time to think. Although I actually already knew my answer, I wasn't willing to let her back into our lives so easily. As I hung up, something became clear. This story wasn't over yet. This time I would set the rules. After hanging up the call, I remained silent for a long time. So many emotions were going through me. Above all, felt clarity. For the first time in months, I had an advantage in this situation. I wasn't going to waste it that night. While the children slept, I reflected on everything that had happened since her departure. I thought about the long nights I spent awake worrying about how I would manage everything without her, about my children's tears, wondering why their mother didn't call them, about the excuses I had to make to justify her absence. I thought about the man I had become by dealing with all of that. I wasn't the same person she had left. I was stronger, more determined, and I had learned that some doors shouldn't be reopened. 2 days later she called again. This time I answered immediately, determined to confront her. Tone was a mixture of pleading and desperation. "Please, let me explain in person. I want us to talk about this calmly. I don't want you to think I'm trying to come back out of selfishness, but I need my family back." Her voice trembled. But there was something in it that made me suspicious. It wasn't just regret, it was fear. I told her we could talk, but we would do it at my house, and under my terms. When she arrived, could see the wear on her face. She was thinner, with marked dark circles, and her gaze, once haughty, now seemed lost. It was like I was facing a stranger. We sat in the living room, away from the children who were playing in their rooms. She began with a rehearsed speech, talking about how she had idealized her new life, and how it had been a mistake to leave her family. I got carried away by the promises of a bright future. All I got was emptiness. "I've lost everything. But what hurts the most is realizing that I also lost you." She wanted to see moved, but every word reminded me of how little she had valued what she had. I asked her directly, "And why should I believe you now? What has really changed?" Her response was hesitant. "Because I've learned from my mistakes, because I want to be a better mother, a better person." I couldn't help but feel that something was missing from her story, so I decided to press her. "You say you lost everything, but what happened to your friends? Where are they now?" Her face contracted. And finally she began to reveal the truth. It turns out that her group of friends weren't as loyal as she thought. When she began to have financial problems due to the cuts in her company, they stopped inviting her to their meetings. The supposed support circle was nothing more than a group of opportunists who only stayed together as long as they could all contribute something to the glamorous lifestyle they shared. When she ceased to be useful to them, they left her behind without remorse. In addition, I discovered that her closest friend, the one who had convinced her to move, had manipulated her from the beginning. That woman, whom I had always viewed with suspicion, had used my ex-wife as a kind of adventure companion, someone with whom to share parties and contacts, but never as a true friend. Now that she was alone and without money, my ex realized that she had been used. The most shocking part came later between tears. She admitted that she had tried to fill the emotional void by dating other people. I thought I could find something similar to what I had with you, but all I found were empty relationships. People who only saw me as a temporary fling. I feel broken. That confession, instead of provoking compassion, made me feel more secure in my decision. She had reduced our relationship and our family to a disposable experiment. Now she wanted to return when she didn't find anything better. When she finished speaking, there was a long silence between us. She expected me to say something, but I wasn't ready to give her what she was looking for. Instead, I was direct. You made your decisions and those decisions have consequences. You can't just come back here as if nothing happened. I'm not your safety net. She tried to protest, but I interrupted her. Do you know how many nights I spent explaining to the children why their mother wasn't there? Do you know how long it took me to rebuild some stability in their lives? You broke this, not me. Now you want me to fix it for you. Her face filled with tears, but I continued. I'm not going to give you an answer now. I need time to think about what's best for my children, not for you. She left that night with more tears and pleas, but my decision was practically made. I wasn't going to allow her to come and go in our lives whenever it suited her. This time, I was in control. Same night, I began to plan what would come next. I knew that my ex's return would bring complications and that she would probably try to regain her place in the children's lives. But I also knew something else. I had the opportunity to make sure she understood once and for all that her actions have consequences, and I wasn't going to let her get out of this situation without learning that lesson. In the hardest possible way, the days following her visit were emotionally tense. On the one hand, I felt a kind of relief because finally she had exposed her situation and acknowledged her mistakes. But on the other hand, the idea of letting her back into our lives seemed intolerable to me. I had seen the children struggle to adapt to her absence. I had worked too hard to stabilize our lives to allow her to mess everything up again. She, however, did not stop. She sent me messages almost daily, some full of apologies, others full of nostalgia for the moments we had shared. There were even a couple of missed calls where, according to her voicemail, she was crying. All I could think was, where was all this when you decided to leave us? Meanwhile, I contacted a lawyer, not because I was considering fighting for custody. She hadn't yet made any move to claim it. Because I wanted to be prepared. I knew that her return could complicate things, and I didn't want her sudden emotions or feelings of guilt to affect the stability of my children. One Saturday, while the children were playing in the garden, I received another call from her. This time, she wasn't crying or seeming desperate. She seemed defeated. Her voice was low, and for the first time since she started this chain of events, she sounded genuine. I just want you to listen to me one more time, she said. I didn't want to argue, so I agreed. She asked to meet me in person again, this time in a neutral place. I agreed not because I wanted to reconcile, because I felt there was something else she wasn't telling me. We met at a downtown coffee shop. She arrived early and was already sitting with a coffee in front of her, her hands clasped on the table. When I sat down, her gaze lifted and I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Shame. She started talking about the children, how much she missed them, and how she had underestimated how much they meant to her. Then she changed the subject. I want to be honest with you, she said, and what came next stunned me. Apparently, her life after leaving our family had not only been emotionally difficult but also financially catastrophic. She had not only lost the shine of her new job, she was in debt. It turns out that she had spent more than she earned, trying to maintain the lifestyle that her friends promoted. Excessive shopping, expensive parties, renting a luxurious apartment, all financed by credit cards that were now maxed out. I thought I could handle it, but it all got out of control. And when I tried to ask my friends for help, they ignored me. They didn't even answer my messages. Hearing this confirmed what I already knew. She didn't want to come back out of love or sincere regret, because she was in a hole and saw no other way out, but it wasn't over yet. The most shocking confession was that in her desperation, she had begun to consider legal options to fight for custody of the children. A lawyer told me that even though you have primary custody, I could still argue that it's better for them to live with me now that I plan to return here. That revelation lit a fire within me. It was incredible how she had gone from asking for forgiveness to contemplating taking my children away from me. But what really angered me was her next sentence. "But I don't want to get to that. I just want to fix things with you and the children. If you let me come back, promise everything will be different." I was silent for a long time. Inside me, a small and vulnerable part wanted to believe her, wanted to think that she could change, that we could rebuild what we had lost. But the other part, the one that had endured months of abandonment and disappointment, knew it wasn't that simple. There was something bigger at stake. My children. Finally, I spoke. "I heard you and I appreciate your honesty, but you must understand something. You can't just come back into our lives as if nothing happened. The children have suffered because of your absence, and I have had to be both their father and their mother since you left. Now you tell me that you considered taking me to court to take them away from me. How do you think that sounds to me?" She tried to interrupt me, but I stopped her. "I don't know what you expect from me, but I can't just forget everything, because you're now sorry you made your decisions, and those decisions affected us all. You can't undo the damage with empty promises." I got up to leave. But before doing so, I told her something I had long wanted to say. "If you really want to make things right, don't do it for me. Do it for the children. But I want to make it clear that you can't just come back and pretend that everything is fine. If you've really changed, prove it." If not, day out of our lives, I left her there, sitting at the table with tears in her eyes. I didn't stop or look back. I no longer cared about her regret that night. Talked to my children about their mother. I didn't tell them everything, but I explained that although she was trying to be more present, things wouldn't be the same as before. Mom loves you, but she's made difficult decisions. For now. Still, the three of us, we're a good team, right? They both nodded and hugged me. At that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. After that meeting, I expected her to back off, but she didn't. The following weeks were full of occasional messages, some short and full of apologies, others long and full of arguments about how we could try to rebuild something for the sake of the children. For me, there was nothing more to rebuild. My patience, which was already worn thin, finally reached its limit when I received a letter from a lawyer. Yes, what she had mentioned in that coffee shop had now materialized. She was considering legal action to obtain joint custody. My lawyer, whom I had consulted from the beginning, assured me that I was in a solid position, and that her case would be difficult to argue. The fact that she was willing to put the children in the middle of a legal dispute after everything they had already gone through angered me more than I could express. Instead of responding with anger, I decided to play my cards strategically. I had learned from this whole process that she didn't act impulsively. Her moves were usually motivated by an attempt to control circumstances, albeit clumsily. But this time, I would be the one to take control. First, I made sure the children were. I encouraged them to be open about their feelings, provided them with a safe and stable environment at home, and focused on their emotional needs. I also made sure they were impeccable in their studies, showing emotional stability they didn't have before. I documented every positive interaction we had at home, family activities, games, conversations about their feelings. I knew that in the event of a legal dispute, this would be essential to show that their current environment was safe and happy. At the same time, I began to investigate her current life a little more. The help of a mutual friend, I discovered something that, while not surprising, gave me a significant advantage. Her financial problems were much deeper than she had admitted. Not only was she in debt, but she also faced the risk of being evicted from her apartment for not paying the rent. The worst part was finding out that she had started looking for a second job to try to stay afloat. But what really shocked me was learning that she had tried to involve the children in her promises of reconciliation. In a video call she made with them, which clearly I supervised, she told them, "Soon we'll be together again." I promised. My children, confused, asked me after the call, "Is Mom going to live with us again?" It took all the self-control in the world not to run against her at that moment. Instead, I sat down with him and explained calmly that things wouldn't work that way. The situation with their mother was complicated, that we would always be okay no matter what happened. Finally, I decided to confront her one last time. This time, clear facts and a plan. When she agreed to meet with me, I thought she would arrive with the same defeated air she had shown before. But to my surprise, she seemed defiant. She surely expected an emotional conversation where I would give in at the end. But she had no idea what was coming. "I'm here because I want you to understand something very clearly." I began placing a file on the table inside. It was all the documentation I had collected, evidence of her abandonment, records of her lack of financial support, and even screenshots of her social media showing how she had prioritized her luxurious life over her family. Her face changed when she saw the file. "What is this?" she asked in a trembling voice. "This is what I'm going to use. If you decide to go ahead with that joint custody lawsuit, I know you're going through a difficult time, but I'm not going to allow you to use our children as a tool to fix your personal problems." My tone was firm but not aggressive. I wanted to make it clear that I wasn't playing. She tried to defend herself by saying that she just wanted to be close to the children, and that she had a right to it. I replied, "You had that right from the beginning, but you decided to leave, you decided to ignore them. Now, they have stability, something you can offer them at this time." She tried to turn the conversation to a more emotional tone. "Can't we find a way to work together? Why do you have to be so cruel?" But I didn't take the bait. I made it clear that it wasn't about cruelty, but about protecting my children from more chaos than they had already experienced. If you really want to be part of their lives, start from scratch. Show that you can be a stable and responsible mother, not someone who uses them to solve their own instability, and forget about trying to fight for custody now. Because I assure you that you won't win. That conversation marked a turning point. She knew I wasn't going to back down, and I think she finally understood that her actions had real consequences. I never heard from her legal attempts again after that. In the months that followed, she began to appear more sporadically, but always in a peripheral role. She didn't ask to stay with the children, just supervised visits which I allowed for their benefit. As time went by, my relationship with my children grew even stronger, and our life found a peaceful rhythm that I hadn't known in years. Although I still have moments of anger, when I think about everything that happened, I also feel a strange relief. I've learned that you can't always save someone from themselves, and that protecting those you love sometimes means closing doors that shouldn't be reopened. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the next story.